The 5.1 Archon Quests have undoubtedly secured their place in the Genshin Hall of Fame for absolute cinema. The lore revelations are unparalleled so far, setting incredibly high expectations for the final NATLAN Archon Quest. There are so many things to talk about, so let's get right into it. This video will contain a lore recap and summary of Acts 3 and 4, as well as theories and analysis of the 5.1 Archon Quests. We have to talk about the thing. If you don't know what thing I'm talking about, then maybe you should stay for the lore recap. If you have a pretty good idea of what I mean, and you have a good grasp of what happened in the quest already, and you're really just here for the analysis theories portion of the video, then kindly skip to this timestamp. I'm your leafy lorekeeper Minsleif, and I read the Genshin Impact lore so that you don't have to. To briefly recap the previous Archon quest, Mavwika revealed that Xilonen, an artisan, has been tasked with carving an ancient name for the traveler. This ancient name is crucial to Mavwika's ultimate plan to save NATLAN from the Abyss. Act 3, titled Beyond the Smoke and Mirrors, begins 2 days after the end of the previous Archon quest. In response to the Abyss's intensified attacks, Catherine relays Mavwika's suggestion for the Adventurers Guild and the Signs of the Canopy to work together on gathering intelligence, ensuring NATLAN's preparedness. Kachina arrives and the group sets off to the Children of Echoes for their long-awaited meeting with Xilonen. Xilonen was informed by Mavwika that the ancient name for Traveler would be particularly harder to forge, and it's because Traveler is an Outlander. Now, the term Outlander gets a little bit confusing since it's usually translated to mean one of two ways. One, the individual is not from the current nation, or the individual is not from this world. As established in the previous Archon quest, each ancient name is associated with the heroic deeds of its previous bearers. The continuation of an ancient name from one person to another is a way of preserving the tribe's history. Usually, Teyvat's history and memories are recorded within ley lines, but due to NATLAN's lack of deep, stable-rooted ley lines, the nation's history is recorded in the Night Kingdom, a liminal space between life and death which essentially functions as ley lines. So sometimes characters use the terms Night Kingdom and ley lines interchangeably, or so it seems, but to clarify, NATLAN does have ley lines. They're just very weak and unstable, so the Night Kingdom more or less replaces their function. Due to being an Outlander, aka not a NATLAN native, Traveler's deeds haven't been recorded by the Night Kingdom. Only memories and experiences that have been acknowledged by the Wayab can be used as the basis for an ancient name. Small recap, the Wayab are the non-corporeal beings that reside in the Night Kingdom which protect each of the 6 tribes. Xilonen is uncertain whether earning the approval of all 6 Wayab would be the most efficient way for the Traveler to have their deeds recognized. Thus, they decide to seek the wisdom of one of NATLAN's elders, Citlali. Hailing from the tribe Masters of the Night Wind, Citlali is an expert on all things related to the Night Kingdom and Wayab. Remember the Spirit Seeker Stone that Vichama used to retrieve Kachina's and Malko's spirits in Act 3? That was Citlali's invention. The group feels a bit apprehensive about meeting her because, well, they broke it. Kachina contacts Kinich and it's decided that he'll be the one to deliver the letter. He also shares a very important piece of intel. Back during the fight between Capitano and Mavwika at the stadium, a mysterious person had saved Capitano with powers that originated from the Masters of the Nightwind. This traitor has been identified as Ororon. It's not clear whether or not Ororon was coerced by the Fatui. As Ororon's mentor, Citlali would more likely be willing to aid Xilonen in figuring out how to forge an ancient name for Traveler if they offered to investigate Ororon for her. 2 days later, Xilonen informs Traveler and Paimon that Citlali did not respond to their letter. The group heads to the Stadium of the Sacred Flame to try to see if she'll make an appearance there instead. Citlali does indeed appear, and she's quite the eccentric character and a little socially awkward, which makes sense because she's an old recluse, and it's all still endearing nonetheless. Just as Kinich predicted, Citlali agrees to help the group with Traveler's ancient name if they can also help her prove that Ororon is actually innocent. Citlali calls Traveler over and reads their past. Wealth leads to unending conflicts between people, yet you alone transcend the value of gold is a reference to Liyue. Baleful thunder is Inazuma, wrathful waves is Homzen, a weary yet free soul possibly a reference to Mondstadt, and finally, even the most verdant leaf in the forest will pray for your happiness and safe passage, a reference to Sumeru. Just from that interaction alone, Citlali can tell travelers experience far more than even most mortals, but still manages to maintain the heart of a sincere hero. She also senses some stowaway fragments of souls which stuck to Traveler during their visit to the Night Kingdom, and she shoos them away. This detail seems random, but it's actually foreshadowing for later. Of course it is. Citlali suggests that forging an ancient name for an outlander or non-native is beyond the jurisdiction of any of the 6 Wayab. Something of this magnitude requires the approval of the Lord of the Night. The Lord of the Night is an ancient entity that rules over the entire Night Kingdom, constantly borrowing the power of the sacred flame to combat the abyss. However, the Lord of the Night is currently in a deep slumber, and the only way to communicate with it is through a dream. Citlali would need specific items to prepare a ceremony to achieve this dream state in order to talk to the Lord of the Night. Xilonen offers to procure the items necessary for the ceremony, and Traveler and Paimon investigate Ororon with Citlali. Citlali admits that prior to coming to the stadium to meet with Traveler and Xilonen, she stopped by Ororon's home. Ororon had always lived alone, but she discovered a broken jar, something was wrong with his phlogiston aphids, and slash marks left by Snezhlian weapons. Ororon seems to be an innocent young man who lives an honest life, so what could he have possibly done to attract the Fatui's attention? The group starts their investigation at Ororon's last known location. An eyewitness claims to have seen him speaking to Fatui soldiers at this spot. Again, as Ororon's mentor and quite possibly one of the closest people to him, Citlali is convinced he is innocent and is being coerced by the Fatui. Ororon was left at the side of the road as an infant, and the people of the Masters of the Nightwind took him in and had a hand in raising him. Once he reached adulthood, he built himself a house out in the countryside where he spends most of his days growing vegetables and raising aphids. During the alleged struggle at Ororon's house, the aphids were disturbed, causing them to secrete a special type of phlogiston. Citlali suggests that they can use this aphid secretion substance to track Ororon's movements. Citlali uses a spell to temporarily transfer a portion of her senses to Traveler and Paimon in order for them to be able to see the trail of phlogiston. The trade-off, however, is Traveler and Paimon now also have access to her thoughts, albeit temporarily. The group finds an abandoned campsite and what appears to be a distress signal from Ororon. There's traces of a fight up ahead and the phlogiston trail divides. Citlali and Traveler split up. Traveler's trail suddenly ends and they hear a voice. They fall unconscious and wake up in the Night Kingdom where they meet Ororon. He reveals that the phlogiston paths were a setup to lure Traveler into meeting Capitano. Capitano explains that in order for Traveler to learn of his plans and why he doesn't trust Mavuika, Traveler should meet him east of the stadium. But Ororon urges Traveler to keep this meeting a secret from Citlali. Traveler wakes up from the Night Kingdom and keeps his encounter with Capitano and Ororon a secret from both Paimon and Citlali. On the other hand, Citlali was able to follow her phlogiston trail to a Fatui camp where she believes Ororon is being held hostage. They arrive at the camp and indeed they find Ororon there. In a flight of rage, Citlali eliminates the Fatui camp and scolds Ororon. She asks him why he had saved Capitano back at the stadium, and he tells her that if he hadn't, the Fatui would have just gone for her instead. Note that his demeanor during this scene is definitely different compared to when we saw him in the Night Kingdom. The group returns to the city and Citlali gives a report to Coyopa. The report states that Ororon came to Capitano's rescue because he'd promised to help him in exchange for Citlali's safety. Ororon and Citlali leave to find him a place to stay, and in the meantime, Traveler pulls Paimon aside to tell her about their meeting with Capitano and Ororon in the Night Kingdom. I'm actually really glad Traveler didn't ultimately decide to hide things from Paimon, because I honestly love how much they trust each other. It's not like Paimon's gonna backstab us in the future, anything, right? Oyo? Right? The next evening, Traveler and Paimon secretly meet up with Ororon and Capitano at the designated spot. With how obviously plot-resistant Traveler is so far in the story, Capitano wants Traveler as an ally. In order to woo Traveler over to his side, he tries to convince them that Mavuika's plan is doomed from the start. In order to defeat the Abyss, Mavuika is insistent on gathering the 6 heroes of NATLAN, but the problem is, 2 are still unidentified and therefore unaware of her ancient plan. In order to not tamper with the ways of the Night Kingdom and the Wayab and to allow the heroes to receive their ancient name as intended, Mavuika prefers for the ancient name-bearers themselves to establish a greater connection to their names and be notified of the ancient plan. Although presumably not one of the 6 heroes, Capitano is aware of Mavuika's plan, having kept a close eye on her all this time. Ooh la la. With the growing abyssal attacks, time is running out, and Capitano isn't sure that the power of the 6 heroes will even be enough to drive back the abyss. To be fair, he actually has a point because the previous name-bearers of the 6 heroes from 500 years ago all died according to the lore in the talking stick. Not to mention, we've seen some of their spirits already in previous cutscenes. Capitano reveals that Mavuika has been hiding an emergency plan all along. It's allegedly a way to keep NATLAN intact even if her original plan fails, but it comes with a painful cost. Traveler assumes that this backup plan has something to do with the Pyronosis. After all, so far in the series, it has been the Fatui's goal to retrieve all the Gnosis, with them having possession of every Gnosis from all the regions we've been to so far. Capitano claims that he's not trying to seize the Gnosis merely for the Tsaritsa, but to execute what he believes is the better plan to save NATLAN. Okay, so you know how one of the biggest discussions to come out of the NATLAN Archon Quests were who's stronger between Capitano and Mavuika? Well, Capitano just admitted defeat against Mavuika in their battle at the stadium, and I have more thoughts about this, but before we resurrect the Capitano stance from this confirmed L, we have to get through the summary first. We don't get to learn what this alternative plan is because their discussion is interrupted by Citlali punching the Duke out of Ororon. She reprimands him for colluding with the Fatui. Paimon tries to intervene, claiming that before this, they'd found out some valuable information, like how Capitano is no longer after the Pyronosis at the moment. Before they're able to learn more information from Ororon, he escapes via an illusion created by powder from plant spores. Earlier in the conversation, Citlali told Ororon to forget about some duty that he thinks he has to fulfill. Traveler takes his time to ask Citlali about what this duty is, and the group discuss this back at the Weary Inn. Citlali treats them to a meal where she gets hilariously drunk. Now, I know everyone's been asking this question. How old is Citlali? Is she actually a granny, as a lot of people say? In this dialogue, Chanka actually says, given our ages, it'd probably be more accurate for me to call her my great-great-granny. Further along, Citlali says that doesn't matter if you're 200 years old or 1,000 years old, and towards the end of this quest, she even says, but if I stop here, it will haunt me until I'm 500 years old. She's got some crazy life expectancy if she can say all that. If we assume Chanka's estimate of great-great-granny to be correct, then Citlali would have had to have been around for 3 generations, which spans anywhere from 60 to 120 years. So Citlali could be within this age range, but supposedly also under 500 years old. Some of the characters from NATLAN have Saurian-like features, and funnily enough, especially with the frilled ornaments in her hair, Citlali loosely resembles an axolotl, a real-life creature that can regenerate its limbs and stay looking young throughout its entire life. Axolotls get their name from the Aztec god Xolotl, the god of fire and lightning who often acted as a soul guide for the dead. In the legend, Xolotl would disguise himself as a salamander to avoid being sacrificed to the newly created sun. In the game lore, we're not exactly sure how Citlali is able to live for so long without aging. I thought maybe she has elf ears like Klee underneath her hair, but nope, she has regular human ears. With her being a talented elder of the Masters of the Nightwind, I wouldn't put it past her to have attained longevity in one way or another, but it's probably something we'll learn from her character stories when she, hopefully, becomes playable. Something strange happens though during Citlali's drunk episode. She says, warning, warning, red. The red color of danger has now arisen within that pair of eyes. Hold on to this thought for a second, cause it could be a reference to Arlecchino's backstory in Perrin Harry, but it could also be referencing something that happens later down the line. The group steps out for fresh air and Citlali shares Ororon's backstory. When damage occurs to the Night Kingdom, the souls held within disperse and remain adrift, unable to find a way back to the ley lines. This loss of souls damages the Night Kingdom even further. Ororon has an incomplete soul, something that the Masters of the Nightwind view as a bad omen. Because of Auroron's unique situation, the Masters of the Nightwind wanted to use Auroron as a vessel for lost souls. A ceremony would allow lost souls in Natlan to gather within him, and after, Auroron would be sent to the Night Kingdom to return the souls to their rightful place, thereby strengthening the nation's ley lines. However, as the vessel, Auroron would be sacrificed in the process. The chiefs of the Nightwind tribe sought Citlali's approval for the ceremony. Though she didn't explicitly approve, she also didn't object, allowing it to proceed. The ceremony ultimately failed, sparing Auroron's life. Yet he continues to wonder if his sacrifice could have significantly contributed to saving Natlan. Meanwhile, Citlali harbors remorse for her inaction, which could have potentially caused the child to be sacrificed. Traveler and Paimon return to the inn to rest but are awoken by commotion. Citlali says that the warriors from the stadium are on the move because many areas have been attacked by the Abyss. Citlali plans to head back to the Masters of the Nightwind to aid in their defense. Outside, the traveler runs into Mualani, Yansan, Chaska, and her sister Koichi. All the tribe's outposts have been attacked. Chaska and Koichi were searching for survivors. Traveler and Paimon rush to speak to Mavuika and tell her about their meeting with Capitano. Apparently, the Pyronosis can be used to potentially stop the Abyss invasion, but at a very heavy price. The Pyronosis would drain all souls and memories from the Night Kingdom, weaving them into a giant protective net around the ley lines to effectively shield the nation against the Abyss. While this sounds promising, it comes at a devastating cost, which is erasing Natlan's entire history and culture in the process. Later on in Act 4, Mavuika explains that when the people of Natlan die, their souls are returned to the ley lines, and they'll later be reborn into new forms. I'm assuming that by draining all the souls and memories to protect Natlan from the Abyss, it would mean all those souls in the ley lines would not get to reincarnate ever again. This is the heavy price to pay with this alternate plan Capitano is trying to pursue. Mavuika also doesn't see this alternate plan as a good long-term solution either, given the durability of this spirit net is questionable and can become corroded over time. Mavuika refuses to consider this plan, and honestly, good on her for caring about how the war against the Abyss is won and how sustainable that potential solution is. Note that Capitano isn't necessarily wrong or evil though. Think of it this way, everyone is just desperate for a solution. Natlan is on the brink of impending destruction from the Abyss and time is running out. Capitano believes Mavuika isn't acting fast enough to prevent Natlan's total destruction. Meanwhile, Mavuika faces immense pressure to find a solution that minimizes risk and sacrifice, though such options may be scarce or non-existent. Although Capitano's alternate plan may not fully align with Natlan's best interests, his intentions don't appear to be malicious. His desire to save Natlan still seems sincere. This is further supported by Chaska and Koichi's encounter with the Fatui, who were defending Natlan's people from Abyss attacks. The sisters investigate a Fatui camp and find out Capitano is looking for a dragon relic called a source mechanism. Koichi is injured in the process of escaping the camp. Mavuika is suspicious about this source mechanism. If Capitano's after it, then it means this source mechanism could serve a similar destructive purpose as the Pyronosis in his plan. Mavuika plans to assemble scholars to look into this mysterious device. Chaska decides to bring Koichi back to their tribe to recover from her injuries. Mavuika does something cute and sends them back with their favorite snacks. Citlali then arrives with news that Auroron has returned to defend his tribe. Although he kept his distance from her, Citlali explains that Auroron's fragmented soul requires periodic stabilization. She does this with a gem talisman that she developed, and from time to time this gem needs to be replaced. It just so happens Auroron is due for a gem replacement, so she sends Aoife to deliver a replacement gem for him. I'm really hoping Aoife is a future playable character, and we'll talk about this further in the video. However, there is a catch. The bag also contains a spell that copied all of Auroron's memories into the old gem, allowing them to uncover his secrets. Citlali, Traveler, and Paimon use this opportunity to take a peek into his memories. While tending to his garden, Auroron is approached by a local tribesman who informs him about the Fatui. Later that night, surely enough, Capitano pays him a visit and asks if he knows Citlali. Auroron just vaguely answers him, so Capitano departs, prompting Auroron to follow him in an attempt to uncover the Fatui's plans. Auroron tracks them to a camp and he proceeds to observe Capitano from afar. Suddenly, one of the Fatui men starts to feel dizzy. Capitano senses that souls from the Night Kingdom had escaped due to a leyline disturbance, so he uses a spell to dispel the souls. This surprises Ororon because that spell comes from the Masters of the Nightwind. Note that a variation of this spell is what Citlali did to Traveler during their first meeting. Ororon mentioned soul ferrying, and I want to circle back to this later because it reminds me of an interesting world quest in Inazuma, and it kind of had me spiraling into a theory, but we'll talk about it later, I promise. Theories have been bugging me for the past couple days, so I'm gonna let them bother you too, don't worry. So back to Ororon's memories. It's here we find out that Ororon actually inspired Capitano's true plan to save NATLAN. Instead of creating a protective net around NATLAN's ley lines, Capitano intends to completely reconstruct them. Paimon has a point about Capitano's plans. She actually took the words right out of my mouth. This is Loom of Fate levels of conspiracy and planning. Does reconstructing NATLAN's ley lines mean that the Night Kingdom no longer needs to exist? There's a lot to consider. Manipulating the ley lines in such a way could be detrimental to everyone in NATLAN, thus Traveler and Paimon inform Mavuika right away. This is where Act 3 Beyond the Smoke and Mirrors Archon Quest ends. Act 4, The Rainbow Destined to Burn immediately starts with Traveler and Paimon informing Mavuika of Capitano's potentially dangerous plan to reconstruct the ley lines. Once again, the source mechanism is an ancient dragon relic, meaning it's likely that it's not well researched or understood. It's very risky. Mavuika decides that the best way to stop the Fatui is to destroy the source mechanism. Kinich and Hao are sent as a distraction for the Fatui forces, while the rest of the team locate the device. The group reaches Capitano and Ororon, but they're too late and the source mechanism is activated. Suddenly, a piercing sound rings through the air. Ororon seems possessed and tries to attack Shilonen. Capitano stops Ororon and casts a spell on him. He then demands to know the identity of the entity possessing Ororon's body. The entity reveals itself to be one of Capitano's past subordinates, a Conrian soldier named Guthred. Note that since Guthred is Capitano's subordinate, this implies that Capitano is from Conria. We'll talk more about this later. Traveler uses this opportunity to turn off the source mechanism. In the meantime, Ororon is dying. The piercing sound that happened was caused by the Lord of the Night Kingdom, who'd woken up from the source mechanism activating. This cry affected Ororon even more so due to his incomplete soul. In Ororon's consciousness, we see him in a spiritual battle against Guthred, who plans to take over his body after he dies. In this montage, we also get a look into a potentially playable character, one of Ororon's friends, Aoife, who is a renowned Saurian vet from the Flower Feather clan. Ororon's been told his whole life that if he sacrifices himself for the cause of escorting lost souls back to the ley lines, he'd be a savior of NATLAN. When the sacrificial ceremony failed, he found himself adrift, living without a purpose. His attempts to find new goals or aspirations were just met with dismissive responses. That it's acceptable to live life without real purpose or accomplishments. Of course, the sentiment is that he doesn't need to accomplish something grand like sacrificing himself to save people, but it doesn't make him feel any better. I'm gonna confess something. I was underwhelmed with Ororon's character before this point in the story. He was a little NPC-ish, but this moment right here makes me really like him as a character. Guthred tries to convince Ororon to let go, stating that once Ororon dies, he'll take temporary control over his body and serve Capitano. Ororon refuses to give up, claiming that he hasn't done anything important with his life yet. He ultimately finds the resolve to live, and he escapes the dark realm of his consciousness and awakens in the physical world. Mavuika commends Ororon for being able to do the impossible. Damage to the soul is a tricky thing, but he managed to hold on to himself, which under the conditions Ororon was in, was extremely difficult. After saving himself from the brink of death and finding a new resolve for life, Ororon receives his ancient name. Sanhaj Kumpore was the hero who previously bore the name, and pre-NATLAN, he was mentioned in the lore of the Talking Stick. He was one of the heroes who died in battle against the Abyss 500 years ago. In the past, Sanhaj had a vision of his future and saw that he would die in battle. But even though he knew this, he still willingly sacrificed his life to save NATLAN, and so Ororon receives his ancient name. That's 5 heroes down and only 1 more to go. The Lord of the Night addresses the group, apologizing for her waking cry earlier. Imagine a morning yawn so powerful it almost destroys the fragile soul of a human nearby. As her name suggests, the Lord of the Night rules over the Night Kingdom, but due to her limited power, sleep is the only way she can extend her existence. Her hibernation totally reminds me of Venti, who sleeps for hundreds of years and wakes up to a new calamity. Her name, Yohuetecutin, means Lords of the Night in Mesoamerican mythology, and they were deities who ruled over every 9th night. Each lord represented a different fortune or omen for each night. Capitano originally thought the source mechanism would reconstruct NATLAN's ley lines, so why did it wake up the Lord of the Night instead? Well, that's because the Lord of the Night created the Night Kingdom. Mavwika explains that long ago, the war between the Primordial One and the 7 sovereigns destroyed the corner of the world, allowing the Abyss to invade. This war was first mentioned in the Byakuyokoku collection from Enkanomiya under the section titled Before Sun and Moon. This record details Teyvat's earliest known history, in which the first god of Teyvat, the Primordial One, descended to this world and colonized the land, which was originally owned by the dragon race and the 7 elemental dragon sovereigns. 3 of the known sovereigns so far are the Dendro Apep, the Pyro Shiwakoto, who was killed by the first Pyro Archon, and the Hydro Nuvilet, who is a successor of the original Hydro Sovereign. When the Primordial One defeated the 7 sovereigns, it later created Teyvat's first humans. The Primordial One might go by a name that's more familiar to you, the Heavenly Principles. It's not completely confirmed yet, but it's very likely that the Primordial One and the Heavenly Principles are the same entity. Even though that sounds scary, there's a maybe scarier thing we found out. Even before Teyvat's earliest history, the Abyss was already there. It's been here the whole time. NATLAN's ley line sustained the worst damage from this primordial war between the Primordial One and the dragons. That's not the official name of the war, but I like to call it that. The Lord of the Night used the fragments of NATLAN's original ley lines to create the Night Kingdom. The first Pyro Archon Shabalanque strengthened the Night Kingdom and established the Ode of Resurrection and the Pilgrimage, both practices that we witnessed in the first 2 Archon Quests. The Lord of the Night said that the ancient dragons tried using the source mechanism to strengthen the ley lines, but they lacked the knowledge to do so. Which is kind of insane because the ancient dragons were a highly advanced civilization according to the lore we found in the Act 2 Archon Quest. Implying from her words, the source mechanism predates the creation of the Night Kingdom. Now that NATLAN's ley lines have been replaced by the Night Kingdom, the only thing left that's compatible with the device is the Lord of the Night. Hence why she woke up from it. A source mechanism is the name of something that exists in real life, and it's a parameter in the study of seismic events, both natural and induced. It's a field of seismology that involves a study of the physical model of a fault as the source of an earthquake. The Lord of the Night reveals a startling revelation. She can rebuild NATLAN's ley lines once more, but at the cost of her own existence. Buckle up, because right at this point, there are so many little lore drops that happen one after the other. We'll dissect it more after the summary portion of the video, so just bear with me. The Lord of the Night reveals itself to be from the Seelie race, also known as angels. This is why we see Seelies floating around this domain, and why a Seelie helped the group escape the Night Kingdom in the Act 2 Archon Quest. All Mavwika needs to do is nod her head, and the Lord of the Night will sacrifice herself to reconstruct NATLAN's ley lines. Mavwika refuses the offer, stating that if the Lord of the Night were to cease to exist, the rules of NATLAN would disappear, not to mention all the memories and legends recorded within the old ley lines. The people of NATLAN would face memory loss, mental disorders, and cognitive issues, a problem that was mentioned back in the first Archon Quest. The people's inherent ties to the Night Kingdom keep them from leaving NATLAN. Capitano disagrees with Mavwika's choice, and he reveals something huge, and it's that he's actually a survivor from Conria. He's Conrian! Honestly, in hindsight, this reveal was kind of obvious because he has a big ol' 8-pointed star smack down in the middle of his head. The 8-pointed star for now has become very synonymous with Conria. Capitano has strong convictions to save NATLAN because after he fled from the Cataclysm, it became the last semblance of a home he had left. Mavwika makes a great point though. Making the Lord of the Night sacrifice herself to reconstruct NATLAN's ley lines would have the same potentially destructive effect as using the Gnosis to solve their problems. Too unpredictable, too volatile. Should she require her assistance, the Lord of the Night is on standby for Mavwika's command. Capitano finally agrees to Mavwika's plan given they only need one more hero to execute it. He grants her his Fatui forces should she need the extra help in repelling the Abyss. If you choose to stay in the domain, you can ask the Lord of the Night some really important questions, but we'll get to this, you're probably tired of hearing me say this, at the later half of the video. Back at the speaker's chamber, Mavwika asks Capitano how he discovered the source mechanism. Capitano said they'd tracked down 3 scholars, Aberiwa, Bosomtwe, and Kukstal, and used their research to locate it. This actually made me laugh because those 3 scholars were probably who Albizi, Boborano, and Capet represented in Simulanka during the 4.8 Summertide Scales event. Notice how their names start with A, B, and C. We learn that Capitano fled to Natlan with the rest of his platoon when the situation in Conria became unsalvageable. When he realized Natlan was also victim to the cataclysm, he defended the land for quite some time until he met Ayizu, the chief of the Masters of the Nightwind. Capitano would continue to defend Natlan with Ayizu, and on his deathbed, Ayizu would reveal the secret of the Pyronosis to Capitano. This is how Capitano learned of its ability to drain all souls and memories from the Night Kingdom and weave them into a giant protective net around the ley lines to effectively shield the nation against the Abyss. You know how everyone was speculating whether or not we'll get to see Capitano without his mask? He says that his past appearance is long gone. Even with the curse of immortality, the flesh still rots. During the cataclysm, pure-blooded Conrians were struck with a curse of immortality, while those of mixed heritage and those who immigrated to Conria were turned into hilichurls. Even though the pure-blooded Conrians can live forever, they still rot. Well, at least we know why he probably won't take off the mask for a while. What I do know is that he has blue eyes according to Mika's character story 4. I'm trying really hard to keep my composure, but there's a Dainsleif mention in this quest. Capitano knows him, but he isn't sure how Dainsleif was able to avoid rotting. This is where things get interesting. While Capitano implies that he's more or less a zombie under his fit, Halfdan was potentially a pure-blooded Conrian who turned into an abyssal monster. He's not the only instance of this either. So either Conrians rot like a zombie, or this rot is abyssal corruption. In that case, Dainsleif just seems like it's been significantly slowed down or maybe stopped at a certain point. Capitano is also familiar with Traveler's sibling, and he laments that his strength has also unfortunately diminished through time. Had he fought Movica 500 years ago, the outcome could have been very different. Movica's plan is to use the combined powers of the 6 heroes to thwart the Abyss, and this power was one that the first Pyro Archon Xbalanque got from Genshin's very own God of Death, Renova. But is there enough time? They still need one more hero to enact Movica's plans. The Abyss will have sensed that Ororon received his ancient name, which means a barrage of attacks could potentially be right around the corner. In the meantime, Xilonen and Citlali visit the Lord of the Night. Traveler still needs their ancient name after all. While Xilonen won't drop dead immediately after carving an ancient name, it seems that the process shortens her overall lifespan. It's likely that forging an ancient name for an Outlander is even more challenging than for a Natlan native, potentially consuming an even bigger portion of her life force. Despite this, Xilonen is still resolute in her decision. On the other hand, Citlali read the future of the Pyro Archon and saw death. Although Movica plans to use the 6 heroes to release the power of the God of Death to stop the Abyss, using that power comes at the price of death itself. Traveler is a descender, meaning they are resistant to the fate imposed upon this world. Citlali is convinced that Traveler could be the key to at least stalling Movica's death. The Lord of the Night approves of Traveler and gives them a special parchment which can record Traveler's deeds in Natlan, both past and future. With it, they can finally forge Traveler's ancient name. The parchment titled The Pilgrim's Chronicle is a story item you can interact with and read from. Out of the 14 visible entries, only 8 can be unlocked as per the time of making this video. You need to complete all the NATLAN Archon quests up until this point, all 3 tribal chronicles, and the world quest Revelations from the past. The Abyss has sensed that Ororon received his ancient name, and now all corners of Natlan are reporting vicious abyssal attacks. Traveler and Paimon are tasked with assisting the affected areas. Up until this point, Archon Quests never scared me. Even though the story is insanely hype and wonderful, I never really feel like anyone is in real danger. Yeah, there's been incredibly sad scenes, some really heartbreaking deaths, but the light at the end of the tunnel is always within your peripherals, every single quest. Up until this point, I've been lulled into a false sense of security. Natlan deploys a new battle report mechanic where you can track abyssal activity and see the live feed of active monsters, total deaths, and incidents resolved. Couriers from the Signs of the Canopy are constantly running around trying to update the reports and keep Natlan in communication with each other. There are hotspots on the map indicating areas that need assistance from the Abyss. As a traveler, you join them in battle saving civilians and Saurians alike. This gameplay loop continues until a massive surge of abyssal energy engulfs the sacred flame. Numerous abyss pylons and monsters appear all over the map. As the battle rages on, a manifestation of the abyss appears in the sky. Luckily, Mavuika is able to slow down the complete takeover of the sacred flame with the Gnosis, but this won't last very long. The battle report that once seemed pretty manageable is overrun by the abyss. There are less hotspots for you to go to as the abyssal corruption steadily increases throughout the land. Some hotspots are completely taken over by the abyss and you can't even get to them. To make matters worse, when you save one hotspot, another one disappears. This means for every civilian or warrior or saurian you save, others perish in their place because no one could get to them on time. You'll find that everyone's playthrough of events is completely different based on which characters you're able to save. You can't save everyone, and you're left with the cruel need to choose. This Archon quest started to feel very real when I saw dead saurians on the ground for the first time. And it just got worse when I made it to a camp and it was littered with the dead bodies of warriors. I can't even begin to relay the sense of dread that started building up for me. I'll never forget how fast my heart was racing or how scared I was to click on a hotspot only to find no survivors left. What broke me was the enormous death toll. I'll never forget this Archon quest because I genuinely started crying when I saw it. Abyssal corruption was already at 74% and I was powerless to stop more people from dying. Looking at the map just made things worse. All the hotspots that have lost contact due to the immense corruption or loss of life. The heartbreaking air balloon ride which forces you to take in the extent of the devastation. I was sobbing by this point. When they said NATLAN was a nation of war, they really meant it. I really have to applaud Hoyo here because they captured the sense of dread, brutality, hopelessness, and grief so well. Although this was the most harrowing thing to experience in Genshin so far, it's probably one of my favorite storytelling mechanics that they've ever deployed. It's right up there with the Remuria World quest. My heart dropped when I saw Toto on the ground, but he's okay. The poor thing fought for NATLAN, got injured, and he's on the road to recovery, but you don't understand how loud I screamed when I saw him toppled over. Back in Act 1, Kachina, Traveler, and Paimon all rode Toto's back to get to the stadium, so I'm super happy to see that he's okay. Indestructible abyss tumors start to appear on the ground, and unfortunately these things can spawn a plethora of abyssal pylons, which allow more and more monsters to invade the land. NATLAN is losing this battle. What's left of the nation retreats to the stadium, the last bastion left. Traveler and Paimon rush to the Flower Feather clan since the area was hit the hardest. There they find Chaska and Koichi, but they're too late. Having already been injured and her defenses weakened in the previous Archon quest, Koichi has been contaminated by immense abyssal energy. She says her final words to her sister Chaska and dies. Chaska screams in anguish, and in her rage, abyssal energy momentarily consumes her. She's able to control it, and not long after, her ancient name appears. The previous bearer of her name was Menelek, who was also mentioned in the lore of the Talking Stick. Chaska takes her sister's body back to the stadium. Koichi's death is probably one of the saddest that happens on screen. It's right up there with Silver and Malus for me. But seeing Chaska and Koichi's interactions on screen up until their final words to each other really broke me. I was so ready for all this pain and suffering to be over. My eyes hurt so badly from crying, and I was extremely dehydrated by this point. All 6 heroes have been identified, and it's time to enact Mavuika's plan. The Pyro Archon and the 6 heroes assemble and begin the ritual to summon the powers Xbalanque acquired from the God of Death. You have no idea how hard I was cheering during this part. I didn't have tears anymore at this point, but if I did, I would have been crying tears of joy. This is probably one of my favorite cutscenes in the entire questline so far. When Mavuika rises into the sky and she's like the sun up against an evil moon, that imagery is just chef's kiss. With her newly activated powers, from this point on, the Ode of Resurrection will now apply to ancient name-bearers and non-bearers alike. This means everyone who dies from this point on only will be brought back to life. Anyone who died before this won't. The indestructible abyss tumors can now be destroyed, significantly impeding the abyssal invasion. With the last of the monsters now being eradicated with Mavuika's aid, The Abyss stands no chance against NATLAN. Mavuika uses her powers to destroy the Abyssal Rift. The strength of her punch is enough to momentarily break Teyvat's firmament and expose the true sky. And I know what you're thinking. Scaramouche was right. Teyvat's sky is fake. And I promise we're going to discuss this later. With the Abyss now extremely incapacitated, NATLAN is safe for the time being. In the next Archon Quest, Mavuika plans to head to the Night Kingdom to launch her final counterattack and wipe out the Abyss for good. The next day, Traveler and Paimon head to the Speaker's Chamber to see Mavuika but are interrupted by Citlali, who tells them that because Mavuika used the powers of the God of Death, in exchange, she must die. She asks for Traveler's assistance in saving Mavuika from her fate. In her realm of consciousness, Mavuika reminisces about her past before Traveler arrives. Traveler agrees to go to the Night Kingdom with Mavuika to finish off the Abyss. Unfortunately, this means that Paimon would have to stay behind, since there's no guarantee that she'll be protected in the Night Kingdom. Meanwhile, Capitano returns to the domain of the Lord of the Night. It's revealed that he has struck a deal with the God of Death. Capitano too has a final foe to face, and for the sake of the lost souls and NATLAN's future, Capitano asks the Lord of the Night for her help. At the end of the quest, you'll be transported to the memorial that commemorates those who died in the brutal war we experienced. You might recognize Vichama's name amongst the dead. Vichama appeared in Act 2, and he was the one to retrieve Kachina's ancient name and the remnant of Malko's soul from the Night Kingdom. This is where Act 4, the rainbow destined to be burned, ends. Now on to the analysis and theory portion of the video. Buckle up because there's actually an insane amount of information to cover. First, let's dive into what we've learned about Capitano in this patch, his curse, his powers, and his origin story. The 11 Fatui Harbingers are ranked by strength and contribution to the Tsaritsa's cause, with the top 3 possessing powers that rival the gods. The top 3 are Colombina at rank 3, Il Dottore at rank 2, and Capitano at rank 1. For reference, Arlecchino is only rank 4, and Traveler was nowhere near ready to beat her. Given his top rank, you'd expect Capitano to clear Mavuika in a fight, right? Capitano explains that he's affected by the curse of immortality that afflicts all pure-blooded Conrians. While he can live forever, his physical body is still decaying. Despite this, Mavuika describes fighting him in this state as battling the pinnacle of human strength. Which is insane to think about because Capitano was a military man from Conria. Fatui Harbingers can inherit their titles from previous holders. Paraware claimed the title of Arlecchino after killing its previous owner, Crucibina. This observation might be a testimony to Capitano's exceptional strength. Despite his physical deterioration, no one has managed to take the #1 rank and title from him. And it's scary to think that this isn't even his final form yet. Conrians in their prime must have been terrifying, and as of now, I don't think we've seen a Conrian deploy their full strength. All the instances we've seen so far were of them holding back. At the end of Act 4, Capitano stated that he still had one final foe to face. Whoever that may be, I fear for their safety considering how powerful Conrians are. Abyss Sibling also stated that Dainsleif took it easy on them in their last battle, and were it not for his hesitation, Dainsleif could have 36-star cleared them. Speaking of the Dainsleif mentioned in this recent Archon Quest, there are a couple observations about Dainsleif and things related to him that I wanted to cover. First, the rotting that Capitano had talked about. Capitano insists that due to the curse of immortality, he's just a zombie underneath all his clothes. But Mika's character story 4 has me thinking otherwise. It talks about Mika's encounter with Capitano. And right in the middle of the enemy formation was a dark, distinct silhouette. Even though torches lit the area, Mika could see nothing but their eerily dark blue eyes that seemed to glow with an uncanny aura. Eerily dark blue eyes that seem to glow with an uncanny aura reminds me of how the turned black serpent knights have glowing eyes. During the Cataclysm, Conria was struck with 2 important curses that we know of. Citizens of mixed Conrian heritage or citizens that immigrated to Conria were turned into hilichurls, while pure-blooded Conrians were hit with the curse of immortality. For the latter, it's physically impossible to die. And this is why Dainsleif is shocked during the Caribou Archon Quest when Clothar Alberic supposedly died. For the Conrian soldiers that fought relentlessly against the Abyss, they seem to eventually turn into monsters due to their prolonged exposure to abyssal corruption. As Conria's last line of defense, it would make sense for them to be up against the Abyss until the very end. This seems to be the case with Yngilder from the Schwanenritter and Sumeru and Halfdan in the Chasm. For a non-Conrian example, Takumine, the original owner of the Mist Splitter and Thundering Pulse, fought against the Abyss to protect Inazuma from the Cataclysm. He was overwhelmed by the Abyss, and decades later, he returned to Inazuma as a monster. I think the reason Capitano hasn't completely turned into an abyssal creature like Halfdan could be because of his ties with NATLAN and the Masters of the Nightwind. Capitano evidently has Night Soul's blessing, meaning he should be protected by the Wyob. This could be the reason why he hasn't completely lost his mind or memory, since the Wyob would be in protection of that, at least while he's in proximity to NATLAN. The nation also seems to have a more effective way of handling abyssal corruption, seeing as Ateya, Koichi, and Chaska have been exposed to it but never turned into abyssal creatures. However, dialogue seems to imply that Capitano is getting weaker and he doesn't have much time left, so maybe the abyssal corruption he's been exposed to is finally wreaking havoc on his body. This abyssal corruption seems to be what's affecting Dainsleif. I think the reason his hasn't spread as badly could have something to do with what we learned about him in the Sumeru World Quest. If you've never played Covering of Good and Evil, you should, because it's one of my favorite Genshin World Quests. We learn in this world quest that during the Cataclysm, Dainsleif ended up in Sumeru. He was found by Zervin, who claimed that half of Dainsleif's body had become that of a monster, and he was holding a ring tightly in his hand. If you take a close look at Dainsleif's introduction art, you'll easily notice that one of his arms looks rather ghastly. You'll also see this corruption is starting to creep up towards his face. But what is this ring he was holding onto? My first thought was the Ring of Nibelung. The Ring of Nibelung is a German opera cycle composed by Richard Wagner, and his work was inspired by Norse mythology. The story is about a dwarf named Alberic who'd stolen the Ring of Nibelung from the Rhine Maidens. In order to unlock its power, Alberic had to completely denounce love. Only then would he receive ultimate power. The ring was the most desirable object in the world. You can see why this opera cycle is probably a huge literary source for Genshin based on the names alone. Alberic for Kaya Alberic, and Rhine Maidens for Albedo's creator, Rhine-daughter. In Genshin, Nibelung was said to be the king of the 7 dragon sovereigns. Nibelung acquired the forbidden knowledge from outside this world to try to defeat the heavenly principles once and for all. He was trying to reconquer Teyvat for the dragons. Nibelung's war eventually ended in his race's defeat and his own demise. Apep implies in Nahida's story quest Act 2 that at some point a new Dragon King was reborn. So, what is this Ring of Nibelung? If it's the Ring of the Dragon King, why did Conria and now Dainsleif have possession of it? It's possible that this ring comes from outer space, due to Nibelung's lore, or it could also be made from phlogiston, because it's an effective ward against the Abyss. In the 5.1 Archon Quests, we learned that phlogiston is Teyvat's primordial form of energy. The heavenly principles used phlogiston as a basis for the creation of elemental energy to develop a power to better counter the Abyss. Light refracts into 7 different colors, which we collectively refer to as a rainbow. Elemental energy is a similar concept. It's essentially the modern counterpart of phlogiston. I wonder if it's like the Omni element in the TCG cards. Omni meaning all, so all the elements combined make the Omni element. Phlogiston always reminded me of Traveler's Ascension Stone, which is interesting because in the story, Traveler more or less resembles an elemental prism in their ability to wield all 7 elements. This prism-like or phlogiston-like quality of Traveler could be why they're an effective ward against the Abyss. Now back to the Ring of Nibelung. This is super speculative. I'm not joking. This is totally just a scenario I made up in my head. It'd be crazy if once Dainsleif parts with the ring, the abyssal corruption that was due him all this time finally catches up to him and he turns into a monster and we have to mercy kill him. I just made myself sad. Regardless, this item could be the reason Dainsleif hasn't completely turned into an abyssal creature, and it might be more effective than Capitano's alleged method of maintaining it. Speaking of curses, I kind of came to a sad realization or theory regarding Conria and Celestia. There's a specific reason I think that Conrians got hit with the curse of immortality. We learned from Mavuika at the end of Act 4 that when someone dies in NATLAN, their soul returns to the Night Kingdom and they'll be reborn in NATLAN in a different form. This might not be exclusive to NATLAN. In Surumi Island, an NPC known as the Boatman was tasked with collecting dead souls to the afterlife. I'm going to assume back to the ley lines. Now, Hilichurls can't die a natural death. Their physical form will deteriorate into purple ooze, and what's left of the consciousness will be in a state of perpetual agony. This means if Conrians and Hilichurls die, there's no returning to the ley lines for them. What if Celestia uses the Hilichurl curse and the immortality curse as a means to keep the souls of certain people or populations from getting into the ley lines? If Conrians can't die, then their souls will never make it back to the ley lines. Theoretically, a Conrian can never reincarnate then, which would be really messed up. Does that mean there's a vetting process for which souls are allowed into the ley lines? Where did those souls come from anyways? I have a guess, and this is going to be a long-winded answer, but bear with me. This bigger theory encompasses something that I know we've all been dying to discuss since this Archon Quest came out. So let's talk about the thing now. The sky is a lie. Scaramouche came to the right conclusion all along, and this was information that the Torre also relayed to Nahida. There are artifacts and overworld materials that describe Teyvat as having a firmament, a world structure in which Teyvat is flat and its atmosphere is a protective dome. According to the Byakuyokoku collection, the primordial one may have been Faunese. It had wings and a crown and was birthed from an egg, androgynous in nature. But for the world to be created, the egg's shell had to be broken. However, Faunese, the primordial one, used the eggshell to separate the universe and the microcosm of the world. The universe must be the true sky, and the microcosm of the world must be Teyvat. The eggshell that separates the two must be the firmament or the fake sky. This is the first time we've actually seen past the firmament. Thanks, Mavwika. And what do we see? A destroyed moon or planet. Right off the bat, the pixels in the firmament remind me of the unknown god cubes. In this high-resolution version of the image, you can clearly see circular symbols or markings on this moon. Now, Marjorie's shop in Mondstadt is full of all kinds of oddities. For example, if you listen closely at the window, you can hear a music box tune that matches Herta's idol from Honkai Star Rail. And if you look at the roof of her building, you'll see what appears to be a miniature version of the destroyed moon, circle symbols and all. As a side note, it looks very similar to the moon or planet behind the Astral Express in the Honkai Star Rail main menu. This ball on Marjorie's roof reminds me of the sphere from the movie Treasure Planet. Come on, I'm not the only one that grew up with a crush on Jim and Kovu, right? I was a child, okay? In the movie, this sphere contained a holographic star map leading to the location of Treasure Planet, and as the name suggests, this planet contained unbelievable treasure. Unbeknownst to the crew, this planet was rigged to explode once someone discovered the treasure, and in the end, it does exactly that. Now, if this is really a Treasure Planet reference, then I think it might be correlated to another Hoyoverse game, Tears of Themis. In Luke's personal story number 1, you solve the Sphinx's riddle. It says that the treasure's guardians, Cain, Asmodeus, Agares, Paimon, and Phoenix. There are 2 names here you'll probably recognize. Obviously Paimon and Phoenix, which could be the Ars Goetia form of the name Faunese, the primordial one. If we need to find out more about the destroyed moon beyond the firmament, it might be worth shaking one of those treasure guardians down. I'm looking at you, Paimon. If the sphere in Marjorie's store isn't a map to Treasure Planet and won't lead us to treasure, you know what will? Seelies. The Lord of the Night claims to come from a race of angels. These celestial beings once possessed beautiful forms and immense wisdom. They used their gifts to guide humanity as divine envoys, traveling alongside mortals and teaching them languages and philosophies of nature. Legend tells of an angel who met a traveler from afar. The two fell in love and their marriage was witnessed by the 3 moon sisters of the Lunar Palace, Aria, Sonnet, and Canon. However, an unknown calamity soon struck. As punishment for their union, the lovers were torn apart and their memories erased. This catastrophe also claimed the lives of 2 moon sisters, leaving the corpse of one to illuminate the night sky. The angels were then cursed to become Seelies. Stripped of their former beauty, voice, and wisdom, these once divine beings now offer only small treasures to those who choose to follow them. Old Aranara stories claim the Seelies were cursed at birth to lose their intelligence and form if they ever fell in love with humans. At least one survivor of the fall existed. This survivor might have been Nabu Malikata, the goddess of flowers, who befriended Greater Lord Rukkhadevata and King Deshra in Old Sumeru. It's highly speculated that Paimon is some type of Seelie. After all, she loves treasure, and she was also the one to teach Traveler the language of Teyvat in the beginning of the story. This lore bit actually explains why Paimon has quite a bit of voice lines. But now, all of this information has me thinking. If the Lord of the Night's race were angels, does this make her superiors angels as well? Renova, the Shade of Death, and by extension the Primordial one? According to the lore of the Staff of Scarlet Sands, the goddess of flowers, who is an alleged Seelie, claims that the night sky should have 3 moons. What's confusing is we don't exactly know when this calamity of the Seelie race happened. The moonlit bamboo forest states that the 3 moon sisters were older than the Geo Archon Morax. The Vermilion Hereafter says this: "It is said that Rex Lapis was yet young. The sun was a chariot that raced across the sky. When the 3 sisters of the night sky were martyred in the calamity, the solar chariot fell into a deep gorge." We don't know when this Seelie and moon calamity happened, and all we know is that Zhongli could have been around to witness it. It's possible he existed during the Primordial One's reign over Teyvat, but this isn't confirmed. It's interesting that his age, though, is being used as a measure of time in this instance. A possible guess is that the Seelie calamity happened during the Second Primordial War. This is according to the lore of the Amethyst Crown and the words of the Goddess of Flowers. After the Primordial One conquered Teyvat from the dragons, there was a period of peace in which humans and angels lived in harmony. That was until the Second Primordial War, when a being known as the Second Who Came descended through the firmament and brought destruction to the Seelie race. This could have been the calamity that destroyed the moon in the true sky. In this calamity, the moon palace of the 3 moon sisters was destroyed as well. In the past, Teyvat has experienced at least 2 major floods. They're referred to as diluvian periods, which is a flood of biblical proportions. Think of the flood in Noah's Ark. According to Alice in the Teyvat Travel Guide Volume 2, Tueyu and Kars used to be completely underwater. Even Inazuma experienced this catastrophic flood according to the lore in the Violet Court and Court of Flowing Sand. One of these major floods could have been caused by the destruction of the moon. The sudden destruction of the moon could release water pressure and create large, potentially catastrophic waves across the oceans. Tides also help to drive ocean currents. Without the moon, weather extremes and major weather events would be more common. I wondered if pieces of this moon might have landed on Teyvat. Apparently, there's a NATLAN world quest where that may have happened. Okay, wait, put a pin on that, but it's the To Wish Upon a Star world quest. I still have to finish it. I have a quick theory about where I think the Irminsul and ley lines come from on the heels of this Archon quest. The Primordial One and one of its shades, I'm guessing the Shade of Life, which was mentioned in the lore of the Fontaine Wings, created the birds of the air, the beasts of the earth, and the fish of the sea. Together, they also created flowers, grass, and trees before finally creating humans, our ancestors, numerous as the stars in the sky, uncountable as the sand on the shore. From that time, our ancestors made a covenant with the Primordial One and so entered into a new age. This is a Bible reference to Genesis 22:17, when God made a covenant with Abraham and promised he would have descendants innumerable as the sand on the shore. Abraham's bloodline would eventually lead to the birth of Jesus. Irminsul is Teyvat's world tree, a type of silver-white tree which grows deep underground and is connected to the ley lines of the world. It is the repository or database for all of the information and memories in Teyvat. According to the lore of Dragonspine, extensions of this Irminsul tree were used to communicate with divine envoys. Teyvat's ancient civilizations seem to have been built around these trees. According to the parable of the tree in the Byakyokoku collection, the Shade of Time, aka Istaroth, was the one who oversaw the Irminsul and the distribution of its branches. According to this, one conclusion we can come to is that the Irminsul tree was probably created by the Primordial One and or the 4 shades. It was probably a seed that sprouted and eventually propagated. The theory I'm about to mention next hinges on 2 requirements. Number 1, the Primordial One, the 4 shades, and angels/Seelies came from the moon. Number 2, the Irminsul was planted by the Primordial One and or the Four Shades. So take this theory with a giant block of Himalayan salt because for now we can only operate on assumptions. Teyvat is the Hebrew word for ark, more specifically Noah's Ark, in which a biblical flood wiped out the entire earth save for everyone and everything in Noah's Ark. Honkai Impact 3rd mentions a Project Ark, which was intended to find other habitable places to live so the human race can continue to exist amidst the destruction of the Honkai. What if the Primordial One, the Four Shades, the Angel/Seelies, and humans originally came from the now destroyed moon? Remember how in NATLAN, souls are ferried back to the ley lines after death and eventually those souls will be reborn in a new form? In the Surumi Island World Quest, the boatman says that all must come home. All must return to the moon mansion that golden burns. If his job was to return souls back to the ley lines, why are the ley lines likened to a moon mansion? It could be because the ley lines in Irminsul have lunar origins. They could contain the souls and memories of the humans that used to live on the now destroyed moon. Maybe the destruction of the moon palace was foretold. Maybe the Primordial One knew about its impending doom and colonizing Teyvat was a way to keep the species alive. Another potential mention of the Moon Kingdom lies in my favorite book, The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies. In the distant past, the Night Mother ruled over the faraway land of night. The Night Mother was the source of all sins, and the land of night was the embodiment of her evilness. The Moonlight Forest was the only place free from the rule of the Night Mother. Only there could the people bask in the bright moonlight and enjoy the grace it brought to the living. Everyone in the kingdom of the Moonlight Forest was born with fair skin, light-colored hair, and bright blue eyes. Perhaps the constant lack of sunlight and the nourishment of the moonlight was the reason for their beauty, giving them an appearance different from the abhorrent creatures lurking at the edge of the forest. Remember the Tears of Themis reference I mentioned earlier? The treasure's guardians, Cain, Asmodeus, Agaris, Paimon, and Phoenix. But at nightfall, Urania shall drive them away and claim it as her own. Was the Primordial One trying to run away from the Night Mother? Is this the reason Teyvat has a firmament in the first place? To keep the Night Mother from finding Teyvat? Celestia has done its fair share of terrible things to people, and the Primordial One/Heavenly Principles doesn't seem to be a completely innocent figure either. But this could be a reason as to why the Heavenly Principles wants to keep the fake sky a secret. Well, they're gonna have a tough time with that because after completing the Act 4 Archon Quests, you can actually see the destroyed moon in NATLAN just beyond the firmament. Just be mindful that for this theory of Teyvat being hidden from some evil entity, I'm running off the assumption that the Pale Princess book series is about the now destroyed moon and not Conria, like it's popularly believed or something. Now that we've established that there exists a shade of time, life, and death, then we know there's a shade of space with the Primordial One potentially being the god of reason. However, just like the gods of Teyvat, the shades are named after demons from the Ars Goetia and Gnosticism. Namely, the shade of time Istaroth and the shade of death Renova. So if we theorize that the Primordial One, the Four Shades, and the Seelies were angels, why do they have demon names? Well, according to the Bible, demons are fallen angels. Satan was an angel who rebelled against God and was cast out of heaven. Other angels rebelled along with him and became his minions. These fallen angels became demons. Speaking of demons, we need to briefly talk about the Heart of the Abyss we saw in the sky. It actually has a name, and it's Gosoithoth, which is an anagram of Yog-Sothoth, a fictional cosmic entity and outer god created by H.P. Lovecraft and author of the well-known Cthulhu mythos. Yog-Sothoth, also known as the Key and the Gate, is said to see all and know all. He can make deals and offers with humans and bring back people from the dead. However, anyone he brings back from the dead will turn into a vampire. This lines up with characters who are given a second chance at life or enhanced using the powers of the Abyss. They take on a new abyssal form. However, Yog-Sothoth isn't the most powerful entity. He is potentially surpassed by Azathoth, the supreme deity of Cthulhu mythos. You don't understand, I was spiraling when I looked into this. Azathoth is seen as a symbol of primordial or ultimate chaos, and he might be the most powerful entity in all of Cthulhu mythos. The name Azathoth could have also been inspired by the term Azoth in alchemy. Azoth was believed to be the essential agent of transformation in alchemy. It is the name given by ancient alchemists to Mercury, which they believe to be the animating spirit hidden in all matter and makes transmutation possible. We have an item called the Dust of Azoth, and it can transmute elemental ascension materials and change their elemental type. You use this for converting the ascension gemstones into other elements. Azazite is also an ancient form of energy that Conria used, and the name has an etymology that looks similar to Azoth and Azathoth. Azazite was drawn from pure elemental energy from ley lines and formed into energy blocks for use. I have a feeling Azathoth is probably the ultimate manifestation of the Abyss itself. Could this be the final foe Capitano said he had to defeat at the end of the Archon Quest? Because if so, that's an incredibly tall order. I just want to quickly mention that in Cthulhu mythos, Kanyan was a subterranean realm and was occupied by a hidden race of humans who sealed themselves away from the rest of the world at some point after the last continent sunk. Kanyan and Conria, the similarities are there. Hailing from a planet much like Earth, the Kanyanians were supposedly brought across space by Tulu, founding a mighty civilization. When the continent of Mu sank, they decided to hole up in their underground shelter, believing survivors on the outside to be in league with space devils. The Kanyanians had attained immortality and subjugated other races before them, had the technology to biologically modify vanquished races and other life forms and reanimate the dead for use as slaves, and could dematerialize and rematerialize at will. Zamakona tried to warn the outside world because he feared that they would one day decide to launch an invasion where, given their advanced powers, they would be unstoppable. The H.P. Lovecraft references are in many places in Genshin, and there's a lot in Fontaine if you're interested. Now, I want to discuss the potential future of the NATLAN Archon Quests. Is Traveler going to become the Pyro Archon? This imagery of a destroyed moon reminds me of the classic science fiction novel, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. In the 2002 film adaptation, the protagonist Alexander invents a time machine in an attempt to save his fiancée from death. Despite his efforts, he discovers that she still dies regardless of the scenario. Frustrated, he travels far into the future where he finds Earth recovering from a cataclysmic event, the moon's collision with our planet. A new race called the Eloi now flourish, and eventually Alexander decides to stay in the future. The story here is that fate is inevitable, so if Mavuika is maybe destined to die like Citlali suggests, then maybe, even as a descender, we might not be able to stop that. Or, if we are able to stop her death, surely we only have so many get-out-of-jail-free cards until the consequences of our actions catch up to us. Mavuika plans to go to the Night Kingdom and rid the Night Kingdom of the Abyss once and for all. Typically, the summer events preceding a new nation offer a tiny preview of the upcoming region's storyline. In the Summertime Odyssey before Sumeru, we learned that the Fatui were researching a device that could cause mirages and hallucinations. We even hear Nahita's voice for the first time. In the Secret Summer Paradise, we're given subtle hints about the Oceanid Fontanian lore reveal. In the recent Summertide Scales event, we more or less get a warning that the dead dragon Durin and Dragonspine could come back to life. We're also given some parallels in the way names function in Simulanka and how ancient names work in Natlan. There's an aspect of fate associated with names. There's a side quest in Simulanka that was subtly referenced in Act 4 of the NATLAN Archon Quests. Back at the Speaker's Chamber, Mavuika asked Capitano how he discovered the source mechanism. Capitano said they tracked down 3 scholars, Aberiwa, Bosomtwe, and Kuxtal, and used their research to locate it. Those 3 scholars were probably who Albizi, Boborano, and Capet represented in Simulanka during the 4.8 Summertide Scales event. Notice how their names start with A, B, and C. Albizi, Boborano, and Capet were historical experts of their respective tribes. However, each expert has a completely different account of the past, so Traveler is tasked with uncovering which tribe holds the true account of history. At the end of the event, we learn that residents of Simulanka can leave and manifest in the outside world, like during the dialogue interaction between Nilu, Almond, and Stream. It could be possible that Aberiwa, Bosomtwe, and Kuxtal are manifestations of Albisi, Boborano, and Capet now in the real world. The names of these Natlan scholars are interesting. Aberiwa is another name for Asasaya Afua, who is the Akan goddess of fertility, love, and procreation. Bosomtwe is based off Lake Bosomtwi, a sacred lake in Ghana which formed from an impact crater. The legends say that an Ashanti hunter was chasing an injured antelope through the rainforest. Suddenly, the animal disappeared in a small pond. It was as if this body of water wanted to save the animal's life. Kuxtal is the Mayan word that means life. All three names have an association to the concept of life, which is interesting considering Capitano has a deal with the Shade of Death, Renova. As a side note, when Renova made a deal with Xabalanque to aid him in creating the rules of NATLAN, she said if the Heavenly Principles ever asked, she'd play dumb and say her powers were stolen. Love that for her. Mavuika's ancient name is Kiongozi, which in Swahili means leader. It implies that Kiongozi is the ancient name given to the elected Pyro Archons. For this reason, I don't know that Traveler is necessarily going to become the Pyro Archon. Traveler is getting a specific ancient name made for themselves, so I don't think they can be a bearer of both Kiongozi and this new name. However, if Mavuika does die in accordance to what the rules of using the power of death entails, there is a possibility Traveler could use Renova's powers via the Pyro Throne, via the Pyronosis, to resurrect her. As a Descender, Traveler is one who is above the fate and rules of this world, meaning there's a chance for Traveler to bring Mavuika's soul back from the ley lines. But remember, Capitano is still planning something, and he has a deal with the Shade of Death. He also just asked for help from the Lord of the Night. He says NATLAN still has a final battle to fight, and he himself has a final foe to face. Perhaps Capitano could be the one to save the day instead of Traveler. In Simulanka, it turned out Wanderer was the true hero of Simulanka and not Traveler. Similarly, Capitano could be the one to finally end NATLAN's fight with the Abyss for good. The Pyronosis would be a worthy token of gratitude if he were to accomplish such a feat, and there still has to be a way for the Fatui to get their hands on all 7 Gnosis. But also, Traveler could stay holding on to the Pyronosis until next year's Archon Quests. According to the Travail trailer, Mavuika has a secret she needs to tell us. The rules of war are woven in the womb. The victor shall burn bright while the losers must turn to ash. It's not really a secret per se, since Kinich mentioned this and so did the Dendro sovereign Apep in Sumeru. Apep states that in war, the victor would inherit the right to shape the world, while the losers must turn to ash. Perhaps Traveler or someone will earn the right to reshape the rules of NATLAN, or even the entire world. I would rate Act 4 of the NATLAN Archon Quest a rare 10 out of 10 for me. I thoroughly enjoyed how stressful the war mechanic of the quests were and the insane amount of lore drops that happened, which makes this video one of my longest recaps and analysis so far. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. I'm your leafy lore keeper Minsleif, and I read the Genshin Impact lore so that you don't have to.